Hey everybody, I'm TrackerTD, and today we're going to be talking about the Yakuza, specifically the new Yakuza game. SEGA were kind enough to send me a review code for Yakuza Like a Dragon recently, so I've spent the last week or so playing it a lot. Namely because at one point I got 16 hours into the game, then had my save file wiped by SEGA's pre-release update tomfoolery, so now I had to redo all those hours. Oof. I wound up managing to beat it just as it launched officially, and I've picked up a slew of tips, tricks and strategies to help make your adventure through Yokohama and beyond a slightly more comfortable one. I say this because if you're accustomed to the somewhat breezy difficulty of previous Yakuza games, you might be in for a rude awakening with Yakuza Like a Dragon, thanks in part to the shift to the turn-based RPG genre, meaning you can't guzzle toughness drinks every single second. This game is a hell of a lot harder than previous games in the series, and in particular, there's several specific moments during the story where the game's challenge suddenly leaps without warning. I'd go as far as saying it's the most challenging modern SEGA game I've played, let alone just the hardest Yakuza game. The difficulty spikes caught me off guard, but I've suffered so you don't have to. Or something. Spoiler warning! Over the course of Yakuza Like a Dragon story, you will run into new party members. A lot of these have been shown in the trailers, but just on the off chance that they haven't, you will see these party members in this video. I did earnestly try to blur out any footage of them from the clips I recorded, but it was just becoming very unfeasible, especially when some of the clips actually tie to the characters themselves. So, I've tried to be vague as possible about it. I do mention one optional party member you can get, but they aren't tied to the story in any way. I also mention a boss fight that comes a bit later on in the game, but likewise that isn't a character focused boss battle, and I don't mention any context behind anything or anything. These tips are squarely gameplay focused. As is fairly standard for Yakuza games at this point, Like a Dragon has a business management simulator packed in with it. This time, you're tasked with turning ICHIBAN confections from a tiny corner store into the crown of Japanese capitalism with the help of Eri Kamataki, Ichiban's new secretary and the actual heir to the business until Ichiban gets involved. I have never been one for this kind of stuff in Yakuza. It has its fans, but I'm not really one of them. So on my first go at clearing the game, I skipped this stuff. And then I got annihilated by all the boss fights that came later on in the game. So on my second go around, after the save file issues, I decided to spend some time on this minigame. Perhaps I'd make some extra money for weapons and items, you know, that kind of thing. Well, if you manage to get within the top 100 on the shares listing in this minigame, which should only take you half an hour or so with some fairly basic management skills, you get a weapon greater than any sword, or baseball bat, or what have you. You get Eri as a party member. Eri might not seem too different to Ichiban's other party members at a glance, but she has one key thing that the others don't: thumbtacks. Her move, Thumbtack Scatter, is almost criminally good at crowd control, and it stays that way right up to the end of the game. Sometimes I'd even forego having my other party members make moves before her at the start of fights, just so all the enemies would stay packed together and in the perfect position for a metric ton of thumbtacks. She makes the first major difficulty jumps at Chapter 9 a hell of a lot more manageable, and helps a lot during Chapter 6 too. The only catch with Eri is that her bond is tied to progressing in the management simulator, so if you want her to be, say, the Night Queen job, you'd better brush up on those business skills. If you want my brief advice for getting to the top 100 quick, just make sure the business stats are solid, that your employees are happy before shareholder meetings, and in the shareholder meetings pay attention to this colour triangle. It's basically the weapons triangle thing from Fire Emblem, so respond to speech bubbles of a certain colour with a character who has the colour icon that beats it. I was able to wrap up shareholder meetings within 20 seconds on occasion. During Chapter 10 you'll gain access to a new party member with a slew of varied attacks, both long range and short range. The flashier attacks cost a decent amount of MP, but are good for crowd control, but the real highlight of her moveset is the move Head Trauma, where they'll grab an enemy, then pummel them till they drop. At first glance, That advice may seem weird. It's a light attack skill and only costs 6 MP per use, but for reasons I can only assume were unintentional, just the initial grab of the move does obscene amounts of damage, even during the game's final areas. If Eri's thumbtacks weren't clearing crowds, I was gradually thinning the numbers using head trauma. This is especially true of one fight during Chapter 12, during which you fight a boss who can make clones of themselves. Head trauma dispatches these clones extremely quickly, giving you far more breathing room. I genuinely have no idea if the power of the grab itself is down to a programming oversight or what, but you know what? I'm not complaining. Head trauma's great. During Chapter 9, you'll go up against a bloody wrecking ball crane. It's not a very fun fight, and I'd argue it's one of the worst in the game. Not necessarily for being difficult, just for being boring. The best way to mitigate some of the pain is something I wish I'd done much earlier in the game than I did, which was having Sayako in the idle job. Coming from playing beat-em-ups like the other Yakuza games, my brain is far too conditioned to go on the offensive at all times during fights, and I seriously underestimated how valuable having a healer around is. It's generally good practice to try out a few jobs as the game goes along anyway, especially as even if you're not into a certain job, getting the first few job ranks cleared can give you some stat buffs that aren't tied to the job but the character. By endgame, I had Sayako consistently as the idle healer, while I had Adachi in the right cop gear to tank some hits. That, and he gets some great crowd control skills later on. I did make it through the Wrecking Ball boss without a dedicated healer for what it's worth, but it's not something I'd recommend as it was basically just a war of attrition. Midway through Chapter 5 you'll run into the part-time hero service, which really should have been a nod to Sega's Rent a Hero, but oh well. It's a handy service for getting some experience and money, and the SOS missions in particular are a great way to boost your stats. The only main downside is that some of the enemies you encounter can be pretty tanky. This is an issue that Like a Dragon has in general, in that some enemies aren't really hard to beat, they just take an obnoxious amount of time to take down, no matter how many debuffs or skills you hit them with. Fortunately, you should eventually gain access to an SOS mission near the homeless camp, and amongst the party there will be a bearded dude called the Invested Vagabond. He's not got a lot of HP, and he only takes a single point of damage per hit, no matter what you throw at him. But if you do take him down, you'll be rewarded with a hell of a lot of EXP. I mean about 5 levels worth of EXP. If this sounds familiar to the RPG fans in the audience, that's because the Vagabond is a pretty obvious reference to the metal slimes from Dragon Quest. That also extends to the fact that if you don't take them out quick enough, they'll run away and you'll lose your chance to get all that EXP. What's important is that while they only take a single point of damage per hit, that doesn't mean a single point of damage per move. Certain characters such as Eri learn moves like Stapler Strike, which can deal multiple hits per use. Use these to take down the Vagabond as quickly as possible. This is jumping ahead a bit, but during the game's final chapter you'll gain access to a dungeon area that has some invested vagabonds on the second floor. My strategy here is to take some smoke bombs, which I'll explain how to get in a minute, clear the first floor normally, and then on the first 2 enemy encounters of the second floor, use smoke bombs to skip them, and then go right to the third encounter on that floor, where there's an invested vagabond. Take him down, get the XP reward, and then boom, that'll be at least 1 level of experience right there, especially if you have the XP boosters on. Then you can head back up to the floor you was on a second ago where there's a save room, then head back down to find the enemies have respawned. And then just repeat the smoke bombing, get to the third encounter, kill the vagabond again, rinse and repeat all you want. Like I said though, that's specifically for the final chapter. Supposedly the vagabond can also show up in Ishinsho's Chinatown, but I've never seen him there. Given this tip revolves around the final chapter area, it might not seem like much help for the earlier chapters, which are rife with their own difficulty spikes. Fortunately, just before one of the biggest spikes, you get access to the Battle Arena. Battle Arena is a 30-floor tower with a variety of enemies and plenty of experience to be had. Every 5 floors you'll hit a checkpoint that lets you step outside, take a breather, heal up at the nearby Wild Burger and deposit your newfound wealth into your bank account. The winnings you can take from the Battle Arena are fairly hefty, particularly from the later floors. While the XP takings aren't quite as mind-blowing as the Vagabond, the monetary rewards make going through the 30 floors at least once very well worth it. That, and you'll get a slew of weaponry for pretty much every job that are probably some of the most powerful you can get. At least the ones I had when I beat the game, so they can't be that bad. My approach was just to redo floors 16 to 20 repeatedly for a while, then tackle the last 10 a little later on. Some of the enemies put up quite a fight, but as long as you remember my advice about the head trauma move and Ares thumbtacks, you shouldn't be kicked around too badly. If I could give one specific piece of advice, if and when you run into the High Necromancer, make taking him down a matter of absolute priority, as he has an instant kill move. That was not a nice surprise, but it can be mitigated using ICHIBAN's Hero Rank 16 skill, Peerless Resolve, which allows him to tank a hit that would otherwise kill him. This is also an extremely useful skill for bosses, especially later on in the game. I did just briefly mention this, but you should really get into the habit of depositing money into ICHIBAN's bank account regularly. You can find ATM machines at Popo, and you want that money to be safe in your bank because any money you're carrying on your person, well, half of it will get lost if you get knocked out, which sucks. I think it's a Dragon Quest reference, but it's not a particularly fun one. So make sure that your money's safe in your bank account, and then you can take it out when you need it. I did say I'd explain the whole smoke bomb thing, so about that. If you spec Kasuga into the 4-man job, you'll gain access to a hammer that you can use in the overworld and during dungeons as a means of clearing barriers. Better still, it's not restricted to the 4-man job. Once you've gotten the prompt to say you've unlocked it, you can use it with Kasuga in any job type. As well as letting you break through to hidden encounters and items, there's a very specific application of it in the Bar district of Yokohama. You can access a hidden shop that will allow you to buy special items such as powerful weapons, EXP boosters, and yes, those smoke bombs. This is also how you access the golden safes that you might find dotted around, though the keys are single use unlike the silver safe key you get at the start. That said, once you've gathered enough money from stuff like Part-Time Hero, ICHIBAN Confections, or the Battle Arena, it's really a very small price to pay. Yokohama is pretty huge, somewhat to its detriment. Early in the game you'll be doing a hell of a lot of running, and you may be slightly let down when you get to a taxi, only to find you can barely go anywhere. That's because a taxi will only take you to locations where you've also interacted with a taxa. Go to the taxa, speak with the driver, and even if you don't actually travel anywhere and just cancel back out, the taxi will now be registered as a fast travel location. If you don't mind paying a tiny bit extra, you can also summon a taxi from anywhere using Kasuga's smartphone under the pause menu. As a fun aside, speaking to the taxi driver will also remove any enemies within your current area. Helpful if there's enemies inbound that you just can't be arsed fighting. I think Yakuza Like a Dragon is a pretty great game, but it can definitely catch you off guard with its difficulty at times, and I did find myself getting quite frustrated at some of the later points in the game where the difficulty just spikes up out of nowhere. There are ways to mitigate these difficulty spikes, and the tips I've given you here should help you do just that.